Well, hey guys, welcome to the podcast today of Thought Club. My name is Sats, and you're joining us for episode 6. Thanks for coming with us this far, and today we are talking about the topic of miracles. But let me just say before we dive in really quickly, please do hit subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you are listening, connecting to this content. I would love to just keep this conversation going, and also I would love to hear what you think. I'm going into some pretty interesting topics, and the concept of this podcast really is just the idea that so much of what we think or have grown up thinking or believing, whether that's religious or philosophical or just our perspective on the world, so much of it is kind of just there, and life is happening at a rate of knots, and we often don't take the time to unpick our thoughts to see where they come from. And I really believe that the way you think changes the outcome of your life, changes your behavior, it changes your actions, it changes your character, the habits that you create. And so thinking, the way that you think, seems to be a pretty big deal. And I therefore want to figure out what is true and how to think. And I've got questions, just like you've got questions. And this is just an exploration of exactly that. So today's topic is miracles, and really want to just talk about what might be potentially the greatest miracle of all time, which is the origins of the universe. So this is a pretty big conversation, and I'm particularly interested if you don't believe in God, and because I think if you believe in God, that's like a fairly easy sort of okay, tick. That's where the universe comes from. It kind of answers that quite easily. But I think if you don't believe in God, then I think there is a bit of a question as to, well, still, how did we get here? Like, you just want to know, don't you? You want to know, how do I get here? And I think it's a question that human beings must have asked for forever. Where did everything come from? And conversations about God or not God. And I think one of the problems you have with this conversation is when you say the word God, immediately everybody has an idea of what God is, whether that's you've grown up in a sort of Christian country environment, family even, and God is for you as a Christian God, or whether you think of just God more generally, whether that's the universe as a God, or you've got another religion, Islam, etc., where there is a specific God, or each of us put a God in that kind of gap there to fit the answer to that question. But of course, the reason I've called this miracles is because I think that's maybe a better way to describe what is going on here. Because if God created the universe, that's a miracle. And even the existence of God is a miracle. Like, I don't understand, how can God just exist? If God created the universe, that is God outside of everything that we can see, experience, etc., then that's a miracle in itself, because who created God? It's a miracle. It's an impossibility, but it's also a kind of a divine sort of paradox that I think works, and a lot of time people who don't believe in God, part of their reasoning, which I think is actually fair enough, is, well, there's no evidence for God, so therefore I'm not going to believe. I'm just going to believe because somebody said that it happened, and think, well, fair enough, that's a fairly rational kind of belief. But then you have to examine the other part of the question if you feel disciplined or that you really want to know, which is, where did everything come from? If God is the easy answer, what is the actual answer? And often the answer to that question is we don't know. But I want to just explore the options of what that could be. So, if we take God out of, in the Christian sense at least, of a supreme being who has created nature, something supernatural outside of the natural has created everything that is in the natural. That's one option. And then there's really only one other option. And I can't think of any other options, so I would love to hear what you think. There's only two options. Either God, a supernatural power, whether that's personal or impersonal, we're not even got onto that yet, has created nature, or nature has created itself, or kind of in the same sort of vein, nature has always existed. So there we go, we've got three options. We'll give you three options. Firstly, just to recap, God, a supernatural power, has created nature. Secondly, nature has created itself, and kind of merged in with that as the third option is that nature has always existed. I think there's a great case to be made that all three of those scenarios is a phenomenal mystery and a phenomenal miracle that requires faith to believe. And I understand the perspective that says, well, I don't have the evidence, therefore I can't believe anything. But can you really live your life without that sort of answer? And the answer might be yes. In which case, I don't think you really care that much about life, because I need to know that. There is something in me that has to resolve. Which one is it? Because it should change the way that I live my life. If I'm just a product of nature, then I would think that my goal in life should be pleasure. I think it makes sense. I think if I'm just created as a product of nature and nature is just kind of doing its own thing, then pleasure, fun, enjoyment, let me just max out. And there can't possibly be a life after this, that's for certain. If nature has created itself, there's definitely no afterlife, no heaven, no nothing, because why would there be? There is nothing outside, therefore, in this scenario, outside of nature. And so it really changes the way that we approach life, and I think that's why it's really important to consider. And I'm really aware in our society that most people are living that sort of life. Most people are living in pursuit of pleasure. And so what it does is it gives us a great case study for pleasure. It gives us a great case study for, just enjoying life. And what is really strange to me, that doesn't make any sense at all, is that pursuit of pleasure doesn't seem to work. What do I mean by that? Like, you can look at documented cases of people who have everything. They make so much money, they've got access to every pleasure, every piece of technology that they want to have, every great place in the world they want to go to, every person they want to connect with, sex, drugs, rock and roll, everything. They can do whatever they want. They can just spend the rest of their days just playing the guitar, if that's their thing, or they can spend it knitting, or they can spend it learning something. They can pursue those things. And it just seems to me that in every single case study, it falls short. And it's a mystery to me, because I would think that if the world is just created at like either itself or has just always existed, pleasure should be the thing that fulfills me. And then we get to the question, why is fulfillment even on the cards? Do I even need to be fulfilled? Well, apparently yes. And why is it that people who pursue pleasure don't just seem to kind of, it wasn't as good as they thought, but it seems that their life ends in ruin. And we see this in the celebrity world in so many ways, where people die young, people commit suicide who have everything. This for me is the greatest mystery. I don't understand. If life is just carnal, if life is just physical, if life is just material, if it's only just what I can see and experience that is real, then why does it feel like there's something that is outside of this reality that must fulfill me? Even if I haven't experienced it for myself, even if I don't know what it is, it feels like there is a gap for something else. And so the idea that nature just created itself leads me to believe that pleasure will fulfill my needs. And yet everybody living on the pathway to pleasure feels like it's working at the time, but it never does. It literally never does. It doesn't work. And we could disagree with that, but I think the statistics are in. I think there's a stat that shows, I can't remember what the amount is, but you get to a certain amount of money and that will increase your happiness. But past that certain amount, I don't know what it is, but it's not like a crazy amount of money. It's like, okay, you're doing well, but you're not you're not a millionaire or anything like that. But it doesn't improve your life. It doesn't make you happy. It doesn't leave you with greater fulfillment. And so there's a huge question there. Why? Why not? Why doesn't more give me more? Why does more seem to plateau when it feels like everything I want, if I could just put it all in the mix, every dream that I got, make it come true? I mean, it should be heaven. It should be heaven on earth, but it's not. And why is that? So let's get back to our scenarios. Scenario number one, God creates the universe. Okay, that's fairly easy. We just go into religion. Which religion's right? Okay, great, job done. Well, there's a whole conversation there, of course. But if we come back out to the other two scenarios, which is either nature has created itself. So that's actually quite an extraordinary thing, because how? How has nature created itself, and why? Why did nature create itself? Well, the how is a big question, because how does something create itself out of nothing? How? It doesn't make sense to me that. I don't understand how anything can create something out of nothing. Like, it just doesn't make sense, because our experience tells us that something is always created by something else. Whether that's, we've designed it or created, or it's simply reproduced in kind, it doesn't make sense that something comes out of nowhere. And so I'm grappling with that, because I think from a scientific, logical perspective, it really doesn't line up. That is an act of faith to believe that. And then we get into the idea that that is a religious belief. And I'm not saying that not having God is a religious belief, not believing in God, but I think when you consider the outcomes, you have to decide if you were going to believe that by faith or believe that by faith. And thirdly, we get the idea that, the universe or nature has always existed. So that seems fairly kind of plausible in one sense, like that things have just always been. I mean, that seems logical as well. But you still have to ask the question: why did it become like it became? And how? How has it always existed? And the answer is simply, it just always has. And, I can kind of live with that, but I think you would have to acknowledge that that is an incredible miracle. It's an incredible wonder. It's incredibly intriguing that this life has always existed. When everything in me tells me that life has an endpoint, I have an endpoint in my life. Why did my cells stop regenerating, stop renewing, stop reproducing, and it just kind of, I'm going to fade out, I'm going to tap out at something? How do I wrestle with death? How do I wrestle with evil? How do I wrestle with these things? If things just are as they are, what does it do to all of these other parts of life? Why is there so much joy, and why is there so much suffering? I think it's an incredible miracle. It's an incredible wonder, which just really brings me to my conclusion that I just think whatever you believe about the origins of the world, it has to align with the rest of your life and the rest of your thinking. And the thing is that every single one of those scenarios for me are clearly miracle scenarios. And so we start our train of thought that really should shape every other train of thought. How did we get here? Where are we from? What does it mean to be human? Well, we're this product of this thing that's just always been. Well, that's a miracle. It's a miracle that you're here. It's a miracle that it's been like that. However, whatever scenario, we start with this idea of miracles, of wonder, of awe, and I think that should shape the rest of our lives, because we see the mismatch between the wonder of the origins and the reality of our everyday. And that leaves us with a whole heap more questions that I think we're going to resolve. If we truly want to rule out option number one, I think you got to bring a little bit more something. Otherwise, you are living just on a train of thought that is by faith. So, hey, I think hopefully that's been helpful, been interesting. Would love to hear what you think. Are there more options than the options that I have determined there? I think there are a few other variations of this idea that the universe is kind of God, and we just replace the word God with the idea of universe. And really, for me, that just goes back into scenario number 2 or scenario number 3. It's just we're using different terminology. So I think it's important to acknowledge that. There are other religious beliefs out there, but really they're on the same level of miraculousness. They're all miracles. And if they are, that should change the way we think about everything else in our lives. Hey, hope you found this helpful. Please do subscribe. YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the jazz. Follow me on Instagram at Solanki. Would love to hear what you think. Have an amazing day. We'll catch you soon.